The Clear Light of Day, Part 17 and the beginning of Chapter 6. Esme, watching October come and go, with its church council meetings and harvest festival services and suppers, felt uncomfortably detached from her congregations. I shall be leaving, she thought. I shall be leaving, and you don't know. Not until the following spring did the leadership team plan to inform the circuit meeting and the chapels of their decision to reorganise the circuit. In the smaller chapels, keeping going felt no worse than the struggle it had been for so long. In Esme's congregations, even Wiles Green, having enough members to remain viable until death took its toll of the elderly congregation, it had crossed nobody's mind that in the event of a cut in staff, their minister would be the one to go. She had spent time reading up in her bulky, hitherto pristine and unopened, current edition of the Constitutional Practice and Discipline of the Methodist Church, so as to appear appropriately informed when she asked her chairman of district about stationing her for her new appointment. He had reassured her that nothing would happen until next May at the very earliest. Nothing would be known until the following September, a year before she would make her move. "So don't panic yet," he boomed in his jovial way. Esme could see nothing to panic about. She could see that her churches would be well served by her colleagues when the time came for her section to be parcelled out into their neighbouring sections. She could see that time was being given for careful decisions to be properly made. She could even see that, in the long run, she might come to look back with gratitude, as the other members of the leadership team reassured her when they met a second time to discuss the redistribution of the circuit. The forthcoming move could broaden her experience and enrich her life. It was just that, listening to the others discuss possibilities and to her church councils talk about futures that only she knew she would not be sharing, something of the old ache of weariness began to return. In the last year, confidence and enthusiasm had grown along with a sense of belonging, in part because the people in membership of her chapels were now familiar to her and she to them. She knew their histories and their family connections now, the places where they worked and what their homes were like. Preaching on a Sunday had a deeper pastoral significance. She knew her sheep, and they had come to know her voice, and trust was growing. And then Jabez. Ember too, but especially Jabez. As she contemplated moving, she began to be more and more unsettled, until the manse that had never felt really like home began to seem positively distasteful. Esme stood in its sitting room, looking at the wallpaper and curtains chosen by other people with the criteria of sticking to a tight budget and giving offence to nobody. She looked out through the replacement windows with their hideous aluminium frames onto the square lawn and modest herbaceous beds designed for easy maintenance at the back of the manse. There was nothing to complain of and nothing to delight in. "I don't belong here," she whispered, and that was true now, whichever way you looked at it. When Esme had first offered for the ministry, she had been a married woman, and it had been late, but not too late, to think of having children some day. At that time, her sense of belonging had derived from her marriage. That had gone. The demands of her work ensured minimal contact with her parents, her sisters and brother, all tied themselves by work and family obligations. She had grown away from them anyway, now, in her own soul journey. Lonely. Her heart longed for someone to be her kindred. "Who will I be?" she asked herself now. "Whose sister am I? And whose child? Who will love me? And where will I belong? What will my home be? Just myself, maybe?" She wondered about looking for some kind of pet. She thought that a dog would require more attention and companionship than her work would permit her to give. But she toyed with the idea of buying a cat. Siamese cats, she had heard, were like dogs in some respects, affectionate, but with the advantage of inbuilt feline independence. She wondered if having a cat might help to create a sense of home. And then, numbly, standing still, gazing without seeing through the window, Esme thought, "I should pray about this. That's the thing I really ought to do. When you pray for things, they come out right. Well, maybe better than they might have done otherwise. At least, if it's awful, I'd have the comfort of knowing it was God's will." She frowned, puzzled. Then, does that mean, if prayer, well, is God looking after me, or am I looking after God? Is there a pattern at all? And if so, does it really rest on my initiative so much, if there is a God? Does prayer really make a difference at all, if it's God's will anyway? And if it's not, does that mean God isn't infinite or all-powerful after all? With a sudden peevish, restless sense of irritation and an inexplicable but deep-rooted mutiny against the duty of prayer, instead, Esme went into the kitchen to make herself a cup of coffee. She looked in the tin. No flapjacks left. She thought back to last week when she had stowed a bar of fruit and nut chocolate in the top drawer of her desk and thought she'd settle for that. As she poured boiling water onto the instant coffee granules, she reflected wryly that however big her next congregation might be, any move away from Jabez would involve a reduction in her intake of tea. And she surprised herself by starting to cry. hastily wiping her eyes and blowing her nose, refusing to look too closely at what leaving him meant to her, Esme took her coffee into the study and, more from force of habit than from any specific intent, sat at her desk and turned her computer on. The past weeks had been so busy. An evening opening up suddenly free left her at a loose end. She had no need to prepare a sermon for Sunday. They were back in ordinary time. She was preaching in a different chapel from the previous Sunday. Last week's sermon would do. The church councils were done, as were the circuit meetings and the synod, and the harvest festival produce was all satisfactorily distributed to various worthy causes. She supposed that now would be the time to pray or read, or to sit quietly and invite God's holy presence into the restlessness inside her. But somehow she found it impossible to settle to anything requiring focus and a clear spirit. Esme played 7 games of solitaire and finished her coffee. Without really thinking about it, she found herself telephoning Marcus. By virtue of being himself, more than through office held in the circuit, Marcus served on the circuit leadership team meeting. Esme thought maybe he would be a helpful person with whom to discuss her proposed move. Perhaps he would have some suggestions, help her to frame a more positive outlook on the prospect. Her call was answered by a lady from a house-sitting firm, hired for a month to look after their home and their dog. As soon as the lady began to explain her residence in the Griffiths' house, Esme remembered that the date of the most recent leadership team meeting had been conditioned by Marcus and Hilda's forthcoming late holiday in Italy. They were travelling, she recalled, through Switzerland and staying for a few days in a hotel by the Italian lakes, before stopping off for a week in Venice, continuing to Tuscany, and on to a favourite spot in Florence. Flying home from there, they would be away a month. Esme thanked the house-sitter and ended the conversation. She wondered about going out to see Jabez, but decided it would be too late for that household by the time she arrived. The following day, she had promised the afternoon for pastoral visiting, but the morning was still free. She thought if the weather remained fine, she would cycle over to Wiles Green in the morning, just to say hello. Esme played 5 more games of solitaire, looked at various internet sites she had listed for a free moment, and then decided on an early night. After breakfast in the morning, she cycled over to Wiles Green and found Ember returning down from the orchard with the hen food bucket as she came round the corner of the house into the yard. "Morning." Ember watched her dismount and prop the bike against the wall. "You welcome, as always, to a cup of tea if you fancy my company. But Jabez gone to Shropshire to see his son. He went Monday. He'll be back for the weekend." Esme looked at her in surprise. "I had no idea Jabez had any children." 2 sons he got. Hardly ever sees 'em. He got no money to travel. They got no money to travel. He writes sometimes." "Oh, are they married? Has he got grandchildren?" "One was married, but his wife left him. Took the kids with her. You know how it is nowadays. The other one sits the other side of the church. He won't be marrying. She swung the bucket, making the handle rattle. You having a cup of tea? I got the kettle just on the boil. Thank you. I'll just stow this pail back in the shed. Don't you let on to Jabez you caught me feeding his hens this late. He'll be ticking me off. I don't see why. Hens likes a lie-in, same as I do. Esme doubted this, but she didn't say so. She followed Ember across the yard into the kitchen and sat at the table, watching her make the tea. Jabez's sons, volunteered Ember conversationally as she peered into the brown depths of the pot and stirred the tea, is, as you might expect, not unlike Jabez. Achievements and qualifications all about as spectacular as his. Samuel, the oldest one, he got a BA, failed, from York University. Enjoyed prowling around the North York moors, investigating ancient archaeological sites and studying up on the Dream of the Rood and Old English, as I gather, but not so enthusiastic when it came to George Eliot or Milton. Young Samuel says Milton is good for sterilising nappies, and that's about all. According to Jabez, unless you got a good nodding acquaintance with the Gospels, the Psalms and the Catholic Mass, you got no understanding of any English literature up until the 1970s anyway. That's what he says. If 'tis so, then it's hardly surprising Samuel missed his mark. Never been near a church in his life, not even baptised. Adam now, his younger son, he never failed anything, on account of he never went to any college in the first place. Adam says he's like his father, got a hereditary DNA in getting by. Seems to be the case. He can turn his hand to most things. If life has a manual or a rule book, nobody ever told those three. 'Tis Samuel was married. Well, if this ain't brewed now, it never will be. Jabez usually poured the tea through a strainer into the mugs. Ember didn't bother. She said an occasional tea leaf to chew made it more interesting. I suppose I should find a few days to visit my family sometime soon too, said Esme, with less enthusiasm than she'd intended. Ember watched her, attentive and shrewd. Oh, I'm sorry. That sounded as though I didn't look forward to seeing them. I do. I mean, they're my family. It's just, I don't know what exactly. Somehow they make me feel a bit of a failure. They're not Methodist. I was brought up Church of England. They think chapel is quaint and unsophisticated and a little bit vulgar. My parents came to hear me preach once. I remember it. I gave my best shot at quite a complicated expository sermon on the teaching structure of St. Mark's Gospel. And afterward, my mother said, I can only imagine the remark was one she'd dreamed up earlier to have ready, and she'd slept through the actual service. But she said, you Methodists, a simple belief. Just have faith. How comforting. I wish I could be like that. But the Anglican Church is a thinking church, intellectual. They never came to hear me again. One of my sisters is the headmistress of a girls' private school. She went on a conference last March where they were told how important it is to give themselves little treats to reward all the hard work they do. She says she works a 100-hour week. So she did treat herself. She bought herself a state-of-the-art wall-mounted CD player. Goodness only knows how much it cost. My other sister is a doctor. My brother is a research chemist. I'm not quite sure what he's doing at the moment. It's all covered by the Official Secrets Act. They're very sweet to me, fond of me, but with the same affection they might show to a much-loved poodle, one that's been in the family a long time. I've dreamed sometimes of becoming a superintendent and then a district chair and then the president of the conference, just to show them. But even if I managed it, I'm not sure they know what the president of the conference is, or does. Actually, I'm not sure I know myself. I think they vary wildly between the ones that deliver impassioned speeches expounding radical political views and the ones with nice smiles that have trouble finding a place to put their handbag down while they bless the winner of the sandcastle competition. Ember chuckled. Something been upsetting you? You sound a bit curdled today. Esme didn't reply. She felt unsettled and restless and sad. Eventually, Ember, she said, do you pray? Tomorrow, we'll find out what Ember said to that. It's a little bit frustrating, isn't it, having stories interrupted for instalments, but it's how it has to be, isn't it? We'll be here forever. Phone would run out of battery. How are you doing? You all right? And what about the people you love, the people you care about? Is everything going well with them? Such a time of troubles, turbulence, sadnesses, I don't know. So much going on. And when it's like that, although we can tell ourselves, oh well, yes, we're all going through it in our different ways, there is a sort of isolation. You know, we've had this time of isolation to do with the coronavirus, but the spiritual turbulence that's happening is also very isolating. We're being winnowed, being shaken up. That's just how it is. I am finding my best response to it is to create as much clarity and peace in my life as I can manage. Simplify, simplify, simplify is my motto. And I find if my living space is very clear and uncluttered, and if my belongings are orderly and few, then I can somehow retain a sense of calm, even when things are choppy, which they are at the moment. I hope you're okay. Well, you know, we have each other, don't we? Here we are. You in your place, wherever it is, and I in my little room. And still, we are together. People talk about the internet and say it's virtual reality, but it isn't. It's reality. I am really here, and you are really there. This is really me you're listening to. And when you email me or comment on my blog, it's really you, and it really makes a difference to me. God of love, we kindred who come here, I pray that you will help us feel along the silver thread that runs out from the centre of our being, to find our sister, our brother, on the other end of the thread, and know we are connected, and know that the thread hums and sings like a wire with the authenticity of grace and friendship and trust. Thank you, Father, for each other. I pray that in these rather wild times you will give us calm and the ability to conduct ourselves with dignity and kindness, and to give calm and peace as a gift to others. Help us to remember to turn again and again to your presence, and to find you in Jesus, our brother, our Redeemer, our friend. Amen. So then, may today be a good day, and tonight may you sleep deeply and peacefully. And however you are physically, may all be well with your soul. Peace be with you.